everything which is happening outside, but what we can call externalities, whether it's geopolitics, demand fragmentation, protectionism, threat of spillovers, and this goes beyond financial spillovers. And almost there was a consensus among the emerging market finance ministers that we need to focus on what is controllable, what is in our hands, and therefore stay the course. And in fact, it's President Jin of AIB, and I quote him saying, "Keep the caravan moving while there are clouds on the horizon." Now, some of the key themes which were coming out of this conference over the last weekend, I'll just go through those. Number one, most of the finance ministers were laser focused on productivity-led growth. Most of the finance ministers talked about private sector leading their countries in their own jurisdictions, whereas government only providing the policy framework and policy continuity. Most of the finance that improving governance, therefore ownership and accountability at the government level is the right thing to do. Deregulation, cutting the red tape, putting the bureaucracy down. In fact, from Argentina, the minister who represented Argentina was not Minister of Finance, was actually Minister of Deregulation. No surprises there. The third one was fiscal prudence, domestic resource mobilization, and prioritization on the expenditure front. So differentiating between good costs and bad costs, which obviously require very tough policy choices, as we are seeing here in Pakistan as well. The second last thing I would mention is, which was very important and was very encouraging, because in this whole scheme of things, you can appreciate there are countries which are well endowed, and there are countries which require help. And the topic of this discussion was shared challenges and shared future. And the fact that this South-South collaboration, where well-endowed countries are willing, ready, and able to step up to help other emerging economies, working with each other in terms of not only increasing investment and trade flows, but also the technical support, because that's where capacity building comes in. And the last thing is that everyone appreciated the fact that global trade may not be a lever of growth anymore because of everything that we are seeing. However, the regional connectivity and the corridors, and whether we can work with each other, अगर मैं पाकिस्तान के context में देखूं what we need to do more with GCC, what we need to do more with Africa, what we need to do more with Central Asian republics, Turkey, etc., it made a lot of sense that we move in that direction from a South-South collaboration perspective. So I just wanted to mention this to this audience because as far as I'm concerned, and the governor was there as well, that these themes resonated. These are themes which we are working on ourselves as well. And so उसमें ये जानना कि पाकिस्तान का ये ना कोई बहुत idiosyncratic risk है और ना कोई ऐसा challenge है जो बाकी emerging markets में नहीं है. But I thought the firmness and the resolve that I saw from the finance ministers of the emerging markets was actually both heartening, and it's all about learning from others as well. Now let's come to Pakistan. As I mentioned earlier in other discussions as well, that alhamdulillah, in terms of macroeconomic stability, we have made some very significant progress. Uske sare jo indices hain aapke samne hain. These are being reported as well, whether it's stable currency, FX reserves being over 2 months of import cover. Then the bane of our country has been our twin deficits, which is lack of discipline around whether it's on the fiscal side or on the external side. So getting into a primary surplus situation, notwithstanding आप सब लोग लिखते हैं कि ये windfall आ गया, वो windfall आ गया, आप सही कहते हैं, तो उसकी sustainability की हमें ज़रूरत है. इसी तरह जो current account for the first 7 months, notwithstanding the discussion that we've seen in January, is on a surplus on the back of very strong remittance flows, and of course on the diversification of exports as well. I think we've moved in the right direction, but I'll come back to that in a moment. And then, of course, inflation has been a good story on the back of policy rate, which is very much the domain of the central bank. But it's SCIBOR, which is critical for all of you who are in the industry or in consumer finance, because from the peak of 23%, it has come down to 11%, and some of the financing has gone into single digit. So I think it's moved in the right direction. Some of the institutional flows have started coming back in on the debt and equity side. I'm always very careful in taking credit for the stock market. It's okay. I think it's a data point, which is important, representing the confidence of the investors in the economy. But all of this sort of needs to come together in terms of saying कि जो माशी इस्तेहकाम है, we are in a good place from that perspective, sort of 12 months into this administration. Now, on the back of that, we are not planning, we have been executing structural reforms. So, पहले taxation की बात कर लें, and all of you who have appreciated what we're doing on the taxation side, I'm very grateful for that, because any transformation, first of all, needs to start from home. So whatever we are doing in the tax authority in terms of people, process, technology transformation in FBR itself, people changes have been made, more people changes will be made, but ultimately it's all about end-to-end digitalization. जितना हम इसको automate कर दें और पहले जो process हैं उनको rectify कर दें, because if you automate a broken process, it will still remain a broken process. So end-to-end digitalization, uski ek example is the faceless customs, where the GD clearance has come down from an average of about 118, 120 hours to about 18, 19 hours. And the reason for that is कि जितनी human intervention वहाँ कम हुई, तो ये GD clearance में होता क्या था? अब वो बड़ी simple सी बात है कि वो negotiation होती थी. And now that we are in a sanitized environment, so I can't say very earnestly everything has gone away, but I would say 80-90% of that negotiation has gone away, because that 80-90% of the negotiation was simply about speed money and facilitation money. Corruption, in very simple words. So the moment we sort of continue to move in that direction, it'll help the client side, it'll help us in terms of the revenue increase, but this one example. The other is, and I'm very grateful, I keep on saying it in every forum, we're very grateful to the provincial assemblies and the chief ministers for getting the agriculture income tax cleared through the relative assemblies. तो हर एक बात ये करता है कि जी ये कब होगा और फिर ये आगे agriculture income tax आएगा कि नहीं आएगा. From my perspective, you have to walk before you start running. तो 75 साल की हिस्ट्री में ये नहीं हुआ. So I think अगर ये structural reform नहीं है तो मुझे नहीं पता और structural reform आप किसको कह सकते हैं. Obviously through the National Tax Council. Thank you. The National Tax Council, we will start moving in the right direction in terms of making sure, which I chair as the federal minister, the provincial finance ministers are there, where we will start monitoring in terms of the execution of this as we go forward. इससे भी ज़्यादा जो structural चीज़ हुई है, and there I'm very grateful to the cabinet, where we have taken the tax policy out of FBR and put it under the finance ministry, ताकि जो policy है going forward, of course it will take us a little bit of time in terms of operationalizing this, but at least at the policy level we start getting into economic value considerations rather than making the math work. So FBR going forward is just going to be focused on collection in terms of income tax and sales tax and FED and customs duty, etc. But policy is going to be led through economic value, और उसमें हम एक advisory board भी बनाएंगे. आप में से कुछ दोस्तों को और all our friends from the industry, उनको request करेंगे कि हमारी advisory board पे आएं, हमें उसमें advise करें in terms of how we take this forward. It'll take a few months before it gets operationalized, but that's where we are headed, and therefore we sort of this year we have preponed the whole budgeting discussion. ताकि ये जनवरी में हमने ये बजट का प्रोसेस किक ऑफ किया, because ये कोई ऐसी बात नहीं है, whether it's the banking industry or any other sector, which they are going to come and tell us in April, May, which they won't know or they can't convey at this point in time. We also know where we are. We are in a medium-term fund program, so we know what our constraints are and what we can do or not do and what we can phase in or phase out. So इसलिए ताकि ये by the time we get to the budget, हम थोड़ा सा इसको suspense को कम करें कि ये क्या आने वाला है budget में. So that's where I'm also reaching out to various forums, chambers. I was at Sialkot, I was in Faisalabad over the weekend, I'll be in Peshawar next week, and of course with Pakistan Business Council, with Overseas Chamber, we are taking that forward. Energy side, again, Minister Lagari is taking that forward. जो सारी discussion है in terms of tariff reduction, and I do take your points into consideration in terms of how things need to be negotiated or renegotiated. But the fact that discos or most of the discos now have private sector sort of in majority at these boards, the chairpersons are from the private sector. 3 discos have already been assigned to the privatization. The sell-side advisor has been appointed. इसी तरह जो SOEs की reform है, privatization, we have had a bit of a hiccup, but inshallah PIA is being relaunched. And as I said, the outsourcing of the airports, the discos, we will continue to move forward in that direction. And the last thing I just want to mention is public finance, because I do think that's a very important component of this overall homegrown economic agenda. और उसमें ज़फ़र मसूद साहब मैं आपका बहुत शुक्रिया अदा करना चाहता हूँ, because you helped us in a very big way in your capacity and with your team in terms of working on the homegrown economic agenda, which the Prime Minister announced on December 31 under Uran Pakistan. So we greatly value your contribution, Zafar Saab, in that space. But public finance may, in terms of reducing the footprint of the federal government, reducing that expenditure, I do think is a very important component of what we are trying to do. और इसमें मैं तकरीबन हर फोरम में, मैंने आपके पाकिस्तान बिजनेस काउंसिल के फोरम में ये बात की थी कि the study that Dr. Isha did during the PTI administration was a very, very good study, and dealing with 43 ministries and 400 attached departments. But what I've discussed with him is not the what and the why part of it, but the how part of it. So what we are doing at this point in time is that we are taking it piecemeal. We are taking 5 ministries, we deliberate on that in the right sizing committee, which I chair. We take those deliberations and recommendations into the cabinet, get those ratified back into the implementation committee. तो उसमें कई ministries जो है हमने कहा है कि उनको merge कर दें, एक ministry को abolish कर दिया है, कुछ attached departments हैं, which are going to go away. Of course, there's a huge pushback, because every single ministry came in saying everything that they're doing is strategic and essential. And of course, that is not the case, because if that were the case, we would not be in the situation that we are in at this point in time in the country. So we are doing what we are doing. So we are almost sort of halfway through in this, and we will monitor the implementation of it, because ultimately it has to result in the upside on the expenditure side and in the budget. And then, of course, the pension reforms. तो उसमें जो हमने ये कहा है कि the government colleagues who are joining or who have joined as of July 1 are now going to be on defined contribution. It has never happened before. It's never happened before, because what this has allowed us to do is to stop the bleeding. The stock is still there, and we still need to manage the stock. But flow में जो bleeding थी, उसको हमने रोका है as we go forward. Now, 2 other things I just want to mention before I say where do we go from here and coming to the banking industry. 2 existential issues for Pakistan, and I've said that, I will continue to say that in all forums. One is population, the other is climate. So while we had talked about the structural reforms and the homegrown economic agenda, and of course the 5 Ps sort of covers that under Iran-Pakistan, but unless we deal with these two existential issues, the sustainable and inclusive growth for Pakistan is going to remain elusive. We are still growing at the rate that we are growing, और उसके basis पे जो दो बड़े issues हैं from the population perspective, child stunting. Any country which has children under the age of 5, unfortunately 40% of them suffering from child stunting, and then learning poverty, which is essentially girls out of school. Then in terms of climate, both in terms of resiliency and decarbonization. And that's where we are very grateful to the 10-year country partnership framework that we have just signed with the World Bank, because इस दफ़ा हमने 6 issues पे focus किया है in this 10-year partnership framework. 4 of those are dealing with population and climate. 2 dealing with fiscal and the private investment side. So I think it's important that we work with our partners, both in terms of financing, but more importantly, capacity building. Now, where do we go from here? And when you get into a bit of a stabilization phase, and we have seen it over the last few decades, and also in the last few years, there's almost a sugar rush. Let's put the foot on the paddle and let's go for it. And we were with Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council. Saqib, aap wahan the, maujood the us council mein as well. And I think it's not only the academics, but also the business community, which is cautioning the government in terms of making sure that this time around, when we go for growth, it's sustainable. Because these boom and bust cycles we have seen forever, and it's very easy to get into that trap again and say, let's go for it. And that's where we get into trouble. The imports go haywire. We run out of dollars. We get into a balance of payment problem, and we go running back to the lender of the last resort. So ये जो movie है हम ये पहले देख चुके हैं stabilization वाली. So while I'm very grateful for all the support that we have received, but this time around this opportunity has to be used very judiciously कि हम इसको आगे कैसे लेके चलें. उसमें जो main चीज़ है in terms of road back to the market, where we say this is going to be the last IMF program, there it has to be export-led growth. We have to fundamentally change the DNA of the economy. And the export-led growth is not only through textiles. It's a fantastic sector. We will continue to help, support, assist that sector. वहाँ value addition भी हो रही है. जो home textiles है is doing extremely well, etc. $18 to $24 billion, absolutely, and we will be there to help and support that. इसी तरह IT and IT services में जो growth आई है, I think is a very welcome change. Hopefully, the agriculture part will also continue as we move forward in the growth trajectory. But that is not going to be the answer. Every single sector in this country has to contribute to export. Period. Period. And the spectrum can be from 1% to 100%. Because जो मैंने पहले बात की है और उसी को मैं लिंक कर रहा हूँ जो emerging markets finance ministers की जो बात है, productivity-led growth. Productivity means that we have to be internationally competitive. और उसमें हम आपकी support करेंगे, help करेंगे. The industry is there. Of course, we are on the right side of the rate cycle now. Taxation and energy are still elements where we need to support and help you as industry as we go